So good morning. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we are still letting people in, so I'll keep letting them in as we are moving along. But I do want to be conscious of your time. So again, my name is Margarita White with the Community Foundation of Noble County, and these nonprofit series workshops are a collaboration between the Community Foundation and the DECO Foundation and Crossroads United Way. And so today we are in the second session of our grant writing series. And today we're going to talk about grant framework. Eric Hessel is here with us again today to share about that grant framework. And so I will turn it over to Eric and we can get started, Eric.
Awesome. Thanks for having me back. I am at our lovely library right now, which is why I have this like amazing blue wall behind me and this awesome lighting. I was telling Margarita, I need to come back here more often for these kind of trainings because this is like a nice look on me. I am going to share my screen. You should be able to see kind of where we left off last time. Can everybody see that? I'm looking for heads nodding. Okay, cool. We ended here, and I want to give just a quick reminder of this piece because we kind of hit it hard, right? And then it was right at the end. So make sure to remind everybody, and then we'll move on to the next section. We talked about two tools at the very end of the last session: your grant binder, your portfolio, that grant folder, where you could keep all the pieces that regularly come up in your grant applications, which we also talked about, all those pieces. Keep them ready at the ready so that when the time comes and you stumble on an opportunity to apply, you can just pull all this stuff really quickly and you're pretty much ready. Just have to answer the specific questions for that funder. And then the other piece was the grant calendar. And I shared an example with you and Margarita, and I believe Margarita sent that to all of you as well, just as a template to help guide you track all of these opportunities, right? And particularly to be able to find those ones where, you know, maybe you weren't actually qualified. Right. And so the next time you stumble on it and you go, oh, I wonder if that was you go, nope, it's in my node list. Or the next you comes in and didn't do the research that first time, they can save their own time and you're saving them time by not applying for grants that aren't applicable to your organization. So that's kind of where we ended at our last meeting. And let's see, is that going to move forward for me? There we go. Okay, so now let's talk, we're gonna get into like the nitty gritty, right? You've gotten your whole, you kind of understand funders. Some of them, you know, we're still a little kooky, but you kind of got a broad gauge on what different funders look like, what different types of grants might look like, but where should we go? Like, where do we go to find opportunities? Grants.gov is like where all federal grants are coming from. Federal, state grants, this is that space. Remember, we talked that these can be really, 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 really burdensome, right? So be really thoughtful as you are applying. Now, for some folks, that's bread and butter for them. We have a child advocacy center in our community that is, you know, probably 70% funded by federal dollars. So this is a good place, but just understand that, you know, these can be pretty burdensome. Candid, right? Candid is the combination of GuideStar. If you haven't upgraded and filled out your GuideStar profile, please, please, please do that. Not just for your potential funders, but also potential donors. So the more sophisticated our donors become, the more they're going to their GuideStar profile, which is part of Candid. The other part of Candid, right, is called Foundation Directory. So Candid is the merge of GuideStar and the Foundation Directory. And so you can do some grant research through that. Another organization that our community foundation has used was called Grant Station. And this costs about $100 a year. They say it costs like $500 a year, but there's always a $99 sale. like always, like always. They're going to go $99 for the next 30 days. And it's like, then in 30 days, there's another $99 sale. So this is a pretty good resource, right? There are others, right, that are these kind of like paid resources. One of my recommendations is to check your local library. Maybe they have a beautiful background like this, and you can have your Zoom meeting here, but also they can have some incredible resources, and some of them have the subscription already. So whether it's GrantStation or some other paid subscription, some libraries will actually subscribe as a service for their community. And if they don't, maybe encourage them to do that, right? Because it's not just going to benefit your organization, it's going to benefit the other organizations in your community. And, libraries really like to have people come in their doors, right? It's really important. Also, your libraries have other resources. So I don't know if they still print giant books. You'll remember if you've applied for scholarships like 20 years ago, they used to have these like big scholarship books where you could look for any scholarship in the world. They also used to do that for funders and grant opportunities. Now, I don't know if they still do that, but your library is a great local resource for other potential funders. And then the like sneaky move is like find organizations that look like yours. What funders are funding theirs, right? They're an arts group, okay? You see them as a peer organization, and they're an arts group, and you see that the Hendricks County Community Foundation is funding them. Well, the Hendricks County Community Foundation might also fund you too, right? It's not necessarily a direct line. There could be a few reasons, right? Like most of you are not near Hendricks County. So the Hendricks County Community Foundation probably wouldn't fund you. But you were talking about these peer organizations in your community, near your community, like see who's funding them. And this goes for donors too, right? So not just funders, but see who their donors are. What if you saw, well, Margarita is an annual donor to this arts organization? Well, we're an arts organization, and I know Margarita. Like, I should go have coffee with Margarita and talk to her about what we're doing, right? So it's that same pattern, right? Funders and donors can be very similar in that. And I know that probably gives some people like heebie-jeebies of like poaching donors. But here's the thing, as a fundraiser, right, your job is to give people the opportunity to give to your organization, right? It's not to say don't give to A, give to B. It's you love the arts. We're doing different but similar things. Let me tell you about this, because if it's their passion, they likely will make a gift to both places. Margarita might also go, well, I had a child go through this program at this other organization, right? And so I have a close connection. So consider other similar organizations, especially when it comes to foundations and funders. You may also do the reverse, right? When you find a funder, see who they're funding, right? So check the Community Foundation of Noble County's website. Who are they funding? They say they fund, we get this all the time. We say we fund the arts, which we do, but it's like 5% of our grant making. So we do fund the arts, but it's really small. And so folks then have some context on where our grants are going. So even though we say it, it means you might have a higher bar. The other place to look, but I will caution you on it, is an organization, Foundations 990. So their tax documents, it's probably on their website, and it's probably on their GuideStar profile, right? But you can pull a Foundations 990, and it will list some of their grant making. And that's what I warn you about. We only have to put grants that we've made over $5,000. So your smaller foundations, particularly your community foundations, make lots of grants that are under that bar. So I had an organization come in and throw our 990 on my desk and say, you don't fund anyone in Hendricks County. Well, if you look at our 990, some of our bigger grants come from designated funds that support Riley's Children's Hospital, right? We're a suburb right outside of Marion County, that support a homeless program that one of our donor advised funds loves to support on the east side of Indianapolis. So it's not a perfect gauge, but it can give you some insight, and that information is public knowledge. I would also recommend not coming into the foundation's office on the attack. Just a little side note, right? That's not the best way to build a relationship. And we'll talk a little bit about relationships here in a minute. Here is kind of a guide on when you found some potential funders, 3 different kind of areas to consider. We call it the 3-way fit test, right? The first is geographic. Funders typically choose to support nonprofits in a certain area. And so they may say, we fund in Indianapolis and we fund in, I think it's Phoenix. I'm thinking of there's a family foundation in Indianapolis that's like those 2 places. Clues Fund, if you've heard of Clues, right? They're like Boston and Indianapolis. So it might be city-based. It may be regional, right? Central Indiana. It might be county-based, like we only fund organizations in Noble County. I try to encourage foundations to think of their community a little bit broader than those specific lines, because we know, for example, I'm giving a pitch for all of your nonprofits, right? We know, for example, you serve folks from multiple counties, probably, that people move across counties and that the lines aren't as defined as they used to be. And so we need to be open to serving our community despite these kind of harsh lines. So, for example, we used to say you have to have a building in Hendricks County to get funding. We don't do that anymore, right? You have to serve individuals from Hendricks County. So that should be your first check, right? Okay, I found a potential funder. Am I in their geographic service area? Number 2 is programmatic. Like, what is their mission? For example, Lumina Foundation in Indianapolis is focused on education, right? And degree and certificate attainment. They are not looking to fund your parks project. You may have an incredible parks project, like super exciting, and their program officer might go, this is really cool, but it's gonna be a hard no from them, right? Their focus is X, right? And so think about what they say their programmatic focus is. Now, many of your community foundations are gonna have a little bit squishier, that's probably a nice way to put it, programmatic focus, right? We always have like the 6 things, and it's arts and parks and education and kids and health and human services. And I promise, no matter which community foundation you talk to, there's also this like little extra pocket that's this big, right? It's called like community enhancement or like community betterment. And it's basically anybody that doesn't fit in these specific categories typically falls in this one. So they aren't gonna have that. So it might be beneficial to, right, check out their website. Who are they actually funding, right? Like I said, we say we fund the arts, and we do, but it is clearly not a priority in our funding model, right? It's a much lower chunk. And so being thoughtful about, what that looks like, or talk to the program officer at that organization, right? Because I often have the conversation where I go, yeah, I know we say we fund the arts, but we actually don't that often, but we love youth programs. So really lean into the youth side of your arts program, because the arts is not going to win you a grant in the committee room, but really focusing on the impact on youth might. Like, that's where your sweet spot is. So being able to talk about that. You also want to understand what their goals are, right? So not just programmatically, but we're looking to move the needle on that in a certain, like at a certain direction, at a certain percentage. Can you show that you do that, right? So we're trying to get more grade 3 kids at grade 3 reading level, right? Can you prove that your work does that? If not, right? If not, then you're not the right fit for them, even though you're an education organization. So be thoughtful about the programmatic side, but also the like the program area side, but also like their actual goals, right? Turns out we're actually a STEM program. We're not focused on reading. Like, their goal is reading. So really dig into the organization. And then think about the third piece is philanthropic, right? Funders want to give the type of funding that they're looking to give. That's a nice way to put that. They have a plan for themselves and they want you to fit it. So when I say that, that means maybe they want to fund programs, right? So the example I gave last time was like cute kids learning to read to dogs at the shelter. Like, that program is cute. Our hearts little burst as we talk about it. They want to fund programs. Some organizations, and I don't love giving this as an example because it's not many, but some funders want to fund your general operating. Some, right? Like, I'm telling you, it's like a diamond in the rough. It's a holy grail. You're not going to find a ton of them, but some. And so the programmatic piece might not be as important, right? So what do you need? And are you meeting the community, not the community foundation, this is the funder in general, at what they're willing to give and do? Right? You could imagine that there are definitely organizations focused on capacity building, right? So our organization was focused on capacity building. It wasn't as much about the neat programs that you were running, although that helped determine who was getting capacity building funding. But our focus was professional development, because we knew the staffs at our organizations and the volunteers at our organizations were cutting their professional development budget. So we were trying to supplement that. It could be capital, right? Like, they want to buy you the things that you need to do your work. And it may be a strategic plan or a marketing plan or a something kind of plan. And so even though you're doing fundraising for a program and you stumble on a funder that's doing general operating support, you probably want to apply for that one anyway, because you can offset some of your other general operating work with that. But these capital purchases are some of the hardest to fund because not a lot of folks do it. So maybe finding what you need and matching that with the funders, a mode of grant making. And so this is kind of the 3 questions that you should ask yourself when you find a potential funder, right? Do I meet their geographic service area? If you don't, stop. Let me repeat that. If you don't, just stop. I can't tell you how many applications we get from people all over the state, and we're like, I don't know what you thought was where we went wrong in the way we were explaining this, but like, you're not eligible. Like, stop. Programmatically, right? So move to programmatically. Okay, they do support programs like ours. Move on to the next step. Are they offering the type of funding, or are we able to apply for the type of funding we need? And if all three of those questions are yes, move forward. And Abby and Margarita, because I'm on a single screen today, I can't see the chat. So feel free to unmute, and everyone feel free to interrupt me at any time. So just FYI, as we move on to the next slide.
Not a problem. We'll do that. We're checking it. So if you have any questions, by all means, please put them in the chat, or let us know that you want to unmute.
Awesome. Thank you. So now we're applying for a grant, right? We have done the three-way test and it's time to apply. And so I'm going to kind of go clockwise. We're going to start at this like 1 or 2 o'clock. Read the information and the instructions completely. Like, do the pre-work, right? Stop at any point that you become ineligible. There may have been all three of those pieces felt like they worked. And then you get into, hopefully your funder has a sample application available so you can see the questions that are on it or allow you to preview it. But you may get there and it may say you need a full professional audit and your organization does not have one. Stop, right? Don't keep going because they have their rules. Now, you may consider reaching out to them and going, hey, it says audit. Do you really mean audit? Or can I have financial review? Can I provide X, Y, or Z? And they may go, oh yeah, we just use that language. Right. But, once read it thoroughly, and if at any point you become ineligible, stop. If you have any questions, ask. Right. I think applicants and grant seekers have a really hard time asking questions. And I will tell you, as a program officer, and I see Margarita's head nodding as I say this, like, I want you to put in a good application, right? Like, I want to help you do this right. When I get an application in that's all jumbled and and I'm like, oh, you should have reached out. And, depending on our timeline, I may not have time to troubleshoot you while we're in the middle of the process, right? Like, after the deadline, if I find out that you've kind of totally messed it up, I may not have time to help you fix it. I have a great example from our last grant cycle. We have kind of one that runs all year long. It's just kind of open and you can apply. And then we had one that was a deadline, right? There was a cycle, a very specific funding program. And I saw one come in on the wrong side. Like, I just had a feeling it was the wrong application for the wrong piece. And so I reached out to the organization, they were panicked, and I'm like, we will make this work. We'll get it. I can see what I can transfer on the back end. There's additional questions. Here's the pieces you haven't answered. Send them to me and I'll get it done. But I just happened to have caught it, right? If I had caught that at the deadline, we were on a tight timeline to get my committee to review them and to have the committee meetings and get it to our board for approval. So it was lucky for them. And if all they had done was, hey, I see 2 applications, which one of these am I supposed to be filling out? I could have saved both of us, me and their whole team, because at that point I was working with their whole team, right? A ton of time and stress by that one question. Like, we want to be helpful. Now, I will say that as a community foundation, right? I can't promise you that a program officer from Lilly Endowment is going to answer your call, right? Like, I don't want to get your hopes up. There's usually like a question email address and they answer them at their convenience, but ask questions, right? Do your best to understand what the organization is asking for and what they really want or need. Next, follow the instructions. And I know this sounds crazy, but you would not believe how many people do not follow the instructions, right, to turn it in. That could be a printed copy, and it could need to be one-sided and stapled in the top left corner, stapled in the middle. Who knows? If somebody's asking you to print it, maybe they need to upgrade because it is 2021. But you could imagine that there's all these things, right? That you really should follow the instructions, right? If they give you a budget template, use their budget template. And I know that's annoying, right? I get it. For our application, right, I have a sample budget template that if they don't have one, they can use, right? Because we work with some really small organizations. But, if they say to use something, use it, because whether you like it or not, that's their process, right? And I hate to say that, but they're going to look at it like that. Oh, they just didn't pay attention, right? I could imagine somebody saying, if the answer doesn't apply to you, put an A in the box. If you leave that blank, that tells me either you missed it, right? Like you missed that question somehow in your process, or you didn't follow the instructions. So I find that the bigger foundations are looking for reasons to throw out your application. I know that's super harsh. Like it hurts to hear that, but they're getting way more applications than they know they can fund at the start. So if you have consistently not followed their instructions, they're going to go, they didn't even listen to us. Like, why would we fund them? And so I don't see community foundations doing that very often. I think we're the good guys in the group. I'm just going to say that because we're here presenting. But I tend to find that community foundations are a lot more flexible and a lot more accessible. It's why I love community foundations. It's why I've worked for them for 11 years. So I'm passionate about that. But I promise you, they're looking for reasons to sort. And we'll talk in a little bit about the processes community or foundations can use to review applications. And some of them will include this in their rubric. And sometimes it's not my decision, it's a committee's, and it makes a committee person mad. And they get a stick in their craw, and then you can't get them out of that. So, follow the instructions. Use data and storytelling. It's both. Unfortunately, we're only going to give you 50 words to tell us a story and give us data. I would love for you to have all the space in the world to type your responses to these narrative questions. And I do think that foundations should expand that word limit a little bit. I'm going to make that pitch for you all in this room to your local funders that maybe they should expand their word limit a little bit for you all, because you have great things to say about your organizations and you're doing great things. But you have to remember, Margarita is reviewing 40 applications, and when they're each 6 pages per question, it makes Margarita and her committee very tired. And that's not an attack on the stories, but it can be difficult.
Hey, Eric, can I just chime in something real quick too? From a private foundation point of view, we actually had our word count larger, and then we narrowed it because we found that people felt like they had to fill in that whole space when we had too many words available. And so I just want to encourage people too that, tell the important stuff, because every foundation does things a little bit different, but with us, you're going to get a personal review with a program officer. So the application is an opportunity to just highlight the big stuff, and then you can talk about the details. So we had a little bit different experience with the word count and recently cut ours back.
I love that. Like, you don't have to ramble. You do not have to fill the space, right? But I get that there is space, you need some space to tell your story. So, be sure, but remember, you need to use, remember your reviewers are human, right? So it's either like a single program officer or a whole committee, and you've got left and right brain people, right? You got people that really want the data and you got people that really want the stories, and they're both important. Where do you find data? Consider your community foundation, or sometimes private foundations will put out white papers, right? Put their data back in their faces, right? Like that you did your work. If you're a youth serving organization, Indiana Youth Institute has incredible data. And in fact, if you give them enough time, one of their free services is that they will do some data digging for you. So consider IYI. The census is a great resource, right? You can think of all of these kind of government studies that are out there that can provide you some great data to show the work that you're doing. And then you may have your own, right? Like we've seen this progress. Numbers and statistics are valuable, but don't forget the stories, right? Because the stories sometimes tell more than the data, right? Many of you are working with people, right? And people can't always be quantified. And so being able to tell the story of your organization and your impact is super important. I am not going to talk too much about grammar and spelling, except for please check it. If you have the flexibility, not all online applications will allow you to grammar and spelling check in them. So feel free to write them in a Word document and check the grammar and spelling. It is not usually a make or break thing, but I will tell you, lots of folks will start lowering your scores, even if your other things are high. I really try hard to make sure my committee does not focus on this piece, but it's really hard to overlook. I mean, they have a really hard time overlooking it. So please, 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 please check your grammar and spelling. And then have someone else review it. Can somebody else in your organization review it? Get away from your own application and have somebody else look at it, because somebody else can go, oh, that makes no sense. I always recommend that if you have a younger person in your life, like a 15-year-old, have them read it. Does this make sense? Do you kind of get it? Some of it's going to be tough to read, but do they get it? Is something sound crazy? Sometimes you see marketing ads where you're like, oh, they did not have a 20-year-old in that room when they made that up, when they made up that pitch, oof, and so sometimes it gives some generational context, but also just somebody that's totally out of what you do, just to take a look at it. And if you ever have an opportunity, I know I mentioned this on day one, but to sit on a review committee for somebody else, right? You can't review your own applications, but it will give you great insight onto what committees look for and the things that aren't on the rubric. Because unfortunately, you'll notice that grammar and spelling is not typically on a funder's rubric, but you sit in that room and you start to hear people go, oh, they didn't spell anything right? There's all these misspellings, and you watch the scores lower a little bit. So, make sure you review your own and be willing to review other folks. And maybe that means you have a community partner that you swap applications. I just wrote this, can you review it? Next time you can call it review karma. I'll review yours when you review mine, and we can kind of go back and forth and in the review process.
So Eric, I have a question in the chat.
Sure.
Angie is asking, what's a good way to connect to review committees in our area?
I'm going to make an assumption that means to get on to a review committee and not with the people on the committee that are reviewing your application. So Talk to Margarita. Margarita, are you ever looking for volunteers for your?
Always.
Always. So, talk to the funders, right? Sometimes your local corporations are funders, right? And sometimes they have community committees. I saw somebody pop up earlier that was from the United Way. They can often have kind of regional, local review committees. I've served on the Indiana Arts Commission review, and so they're looking for statewide reviewers sometimes. So, some of those may be of value, and just reach out, ask. I don't recommend reaching out to committee members, right? Like trying to pal up with committee members. I promise you, your program officer is not going to like that very much. I see Margarita shaking her head, and Abby too. So, but see who's funding. Many of them are committees. And if they're at the board, making decisions at the board level, which is kind of where we're going next, so it's perfect transition, join a board, sit on a board that does funding. And maybe that funding, you could just kind of get the back end side of the conversations that happen about applications that come through. So like I said, that's a perfect transition to working with foundations. And I want to make sure I'm going to come here, forget what my pathway goes. So if I have to bounce back and forth, forgive me. These are kind of three pieces of three processes that I have seen at foundations. And Margarita and Abby, if you have a different process, feel free to join in here. First off is the committee. That's predominantly what our community foundation uses, right? We have a grant committee. I kind of consider that like an administrative role, right? I administer the process. We get in applications. I review them to make sure that they meet the bare minimum qualifications, and then I release them to a committee that reviews them. Our committee is made up of board members, donors, and community members. They review based on kind of a rubric and their conversations, and then we come back and we make a decision, right? That goes to the board for final approval, but typically when they come out of a committee review, it's a rubber stamp approval, right? Because of all the people that have already gone through the process. So it's important to understand that, right? So because we use this model pretty frequently, I tell people I'm your liaison between the committee and the nonprofit. It's my job to fully understand your organization and your application so that when we get to that committee meeting, I can be each of the organization's advocates, right? I'm not saying do X over Y. I'm saying, here's all we know. Here's our institutional knowledge about this organization, the conversations that we've had, and now let's make some decisions. That's kind of your committee general process. Your individual process, though, that's the one where you call up Eric and you say, I have this need, and Eric goes, consider it done. And, I've done maybe some review and we make the grant. We actually do provide some grants like this. They're typically smaller. Our board has set aside some funding for the staff to be able to respond to a need quickly, right? And so that is an opportunity, and our board approves those in post. So we've cut the check because for some reason, we've determined as a team, and I say it's an individual work, but I usually go, yeah, I'm pretty sure, let me go back and talk to our team, and our team kind of walks through it really quickly, and we go, yeah, that's right, and then move forward. So there's a little bit of a check there, but it's very individual based. You can imagine some smaller private or family foundations run exactly like this, right? Like a family foundation, it's you know, the guy that funded the whole thing, the guy or gal that funded the whole thing and said, yeah, it's literally my job to make the decisions. So you don't even have to fill anything out. Send me a mailing address and here's $50,000. We could all be so lucky, right? So that is kind of a model. And then I've also seen this, what I kind of consider a combination of the two, right? Where a program officer is doing all of the review and they review the applications. They have all the meetings and they are making recommendations to the board for approval. So they say, out of all of the applications, we decline, let's say we had 10. I recommend us declining 8 for X, Y, Z reasons, right? I'm recommending funding these 2 for X, Y, and Z reasons. And the board makes a decision based on that. So it's kind of like that little bit of both, where there's a lot of control at the individual, but the board still really still approves them, reviews them. There is more of a pitch work coming from the program officer to the board, right? Where they really are digging in. There's probably like a question and answer section in that board meeting where the board is going, okay, tell me about this. Did you ask about this, right? And coming to that. So it's kind of that hybrid model. So the reason I tell you this is because it informs how you interact with the organization and who you interact with and who has the power, right, in the room and who's making the decisions. And so most people, my assumption would be, are very happy to tell you how their process works. Sometimes I love to be able to say we have a committee-based process because it's not my fault if you don't get funding. Like, okay, I'm a chicken. I hear it. I heard it come out of my mouth. But I can say, you know, there was a committee that did this review process, right? We had all the information we needed and it just didn't rise to the top of the committee, right? And sometimes there's feedback and sometimes there's not. But you know, I think folks are really open to like, no, I am the decision maker here in the room. That's why I need to know all of these answers and right, and why we have to have this conversation. So this is good context for, you know, the different types of review process that happen. What happens if I go this way? Nope. Told you I thought I was going to do something funny. Okay. So there is, working with foundations is really about relationships and communication, right? And I hear it coming out of my mouth. Relationships can have a really biased context, right? That because I know Margarita, I'm more likely to get funding. And that's not always true. But what it means is that Margarita really understands your organization. It's not because Margarita is your friend, right? Because I can speak for this, and I'm sure Margarita and both Abby can. We have said no to people we really like, to people that we might associate with outside of our work at the foundation, right? So we have done that, and it's unpleasant, but right, building that relationship is really important, right? For a couple of reasons. One, sometimes that means the foundation has some extra grant funding or new grant funding, and they go, you know, I just had a conversation with Peter, like, and I know they're doing this. Let me call Peter and see if this funding might be available, right? It's really important that you have those relationships so that, you know, if you have an emergency, let's say Macy is like, Margarita was just telling us that their furnace had gone out last year, right? You can imagine let's say you run a shelter, your heating goes out right at the beginning of fall. And you're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? We have to fix this. We're at the end of our year. We don't have a lot of expendable in cash. I'm gonna call Margarita. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for me that there wasn't before, right? So your relationships with them are really important, both through that application and review process, but also outside of that, right? And they may need, because I will tell you, foundations we pretend that we know everything, and we know about this much about a lot of things. Right. And so sometimes I need my local experts, right? Like I need the college network who is helping individuals achieve certificate and degree attainment, where I'm like, I know this much. Let me call Brandy. Brandy is my resource, right? So being that relationship for a foundation is really important. And communicate. I will speak for myself here and not Margarita and Abby, but put me on your newsletter mailing list. Like, I want to see it. I do. I don't read them all. I apologize. I do not read them all, but it is nice to go, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were doing that. Right. So you don't always have to be the one that's calling me, but like, oh, I get your monthly e-newsletter. I can kind of keep up with some new things that are happening at your organization. It is so important to communicate both in person, I put that in quotes, maybe that's a Zoom meeting or a phone call, but also just with your regular organizational communications. Now, somewhere where I can save you money is you don't need to send us your annual support ask. That's me. I don't know if Abby and Margarita are able to like look at it and go, oh, we'll give them an extra $50 this year, but we don't need that mailing, but especially your e-newsletter, I love to see them. It's a great way that I can keep up on the work of what you're doing, because honestly, we are partners in this process. And so some foundations are going to go, we need a monthly update from you on this funding. Well, sometimes your e-newsletter is giving that update on the program that we funded. And like, I don't need you to call me every month on top of that. I don't want you to do more work than you're already doing. You all are busy enough.
So Eric, I'm sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you,
Sure.
but we have another question. So it says we don't put people on the newsletter mailing list. Is there a good way to go about doing that? Or should we just send a link in an email to the organization contact for them to sign up for it?
Either one would be fine. I would say, reach out to Margarita after this or Abby and say, hey, do you mind if, filling this out so you can get our monthly newsletter? You may, especially if you get a grant, it might be a great opportunity to make that pitch. Hey, I noticed that you weren't on our mailing list. I'd love to make sure you are kept informed of our regular activities outside of the program you funded. Would be perfectly good ways to do that. I know we can add people, right? If I have a conversation with somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, add me. I'm like, done. So, I'll get back into the office and you're getting the next one. You might not get one fast, but you're getting the next one. But yeah, it's a great way to just keep your funders informed of what you're doing. It may spur additional funding. I didn't even know you were doing that. That's so cool. Here, we actually have a pocket of money for that kind of work. Let's talk a little bit more. It's a great opportunity. This is personal. I really don't love site visits. This is me. This is Eric on his soapbox. But so hear this. I'm leading into this. I don't love site visits. I think they put a lot of pressure on nonprofits. I typically find that they don't have a lot of return, except for people see the flashy bells and whistles instead of like knowing that your work. It puts a time burden on you all. So, but you may get requests for site visits. So whether Eric likes it or not, it does not mean other foundations don't like it, right? So, be prepared. I would hope that your funder will reach out to you with their questions that they want to ask or things they want to see. You don't have to have cookies and drinks for us. I honestly don't think you really need to clean up too much, right? Like, we understand that you're working with sticky 6-year-olds painting in a room, right? We know what that looks like before we enter. Honestly, if I come into that room and it's like sparkly clean, I'm like, do you even work in here? Like, I have a 6-year-old niece. Like, I can't get away from their house without being covered in something goopy or a color. So, just be thoughtful. When I teach grant making, I really encourage foundations to be really thoughtful about their site visits and really conscientious to the applicants, because we know that puts a lot of pressure on you, and can add some interesting biases both for and against things, when you're there. So I get it. I also would love to come see you when a grant's not on the line. Right. So after a cycle, feel free to reach out. I would love to come see what you do. Right. Don't hear that as I don't care, but I just think it adds a weird dynamic to the grant process. And also, some people don't have anything to show. Right. And so somebody got this like full tour and got to talk to little kids or the people being served by your homeless program. And some people just got to sit in someone's office. Right. Like, because that's kind of the work that they do, is very office-based phone. You can imagine a phone center or something. So I don't love site visits. I'm making the pitch for you all that folks don't put site visits on their requirements during the review process, but don't hear that as don't invite us, because we would love to come see the work that you do. We really, really would. I just don't like it during the review process. That's the book of Eric there. Let's see, I'm gonna jump through here. So after receiving your grant, because you are going to receive a grant because you went through this training, you've talked to your program officers, you met the 3-way fit, you were prepared with your calendar, you were all set and ready to go, you will receive a grant. First off, be sure to recognize, the funder, both, recognize them in your notices, right? Here's the thing. Foundations are nonprofits too, and we do want people to know that we supported you and that we're doing good work as well. And so I'm not saying we have to be the lead name on all of your stuff, but wherever you recognize your donors and funders, please consider that. Please consider a thank you. Email is fine. Handwritten. You don't need to church it up in any way, but just like an email is fine, just to acknowledge that you got the check, you got the, all of that, please make that acknowledgement. I've got acknowledge and recognize twice, and I'm not sure why. Next is your reporting. Follow their reporting processes, right? They may want monthly check-ins. They may want quarterly. It depends on the length of the investment, the dollar amount of the investment. We have a very specific report that we ask for. I will tell you, it's just a press release. We ask our recipients to fill out a press release and give us one number that was important to their program or project. So sometimes that's not the number of people you served. Sometimes that's the depth of people you served and how deeply you served them. And then we add our little language to it and we send it out. So you get some publicity, we get some publicity, and all you had to do is write 2 paragraphs. It's kind of nice, but use the one that they give you in the format that they gave it to you, because there might be a reason for that format. If you have gotten, this is a kind of a change in reporting that I'm starting to see bubble up, is, if you've already done a report on this project and, reach out to Abby and go, hey, I just did this report for this other funder. Will you take a look at it? Would this be enough so that I don't have to redo your report? Right? Honestly, if you had that for me, I would take it. I would love to tell you that we frame all of your reports and that they're all up on our walls, and the board members come in weekly and look at all the great reports we have. But that's not usually what happens. You know, there's some review of them and there's some follow-up, but often it's just your program officer that's reviewing that. Sometimes a board member, a committee member might ask, but you know, I really do want that to be easy for you all, right? Because the work that you do is the important piece. The reporting, in my opinion, is not the most important thing of what you're doing and what we're funding. Make sure you account for your funds really well. You know, if there's leftovers, you know, woo, we wish, you know, let us know. Sometimes the funder is going to be like, keep it and apply it to something else. Little known fact, I really don't want the money back. It's a big old pain to get that in the right spot. I've had somebody bring in 17 cents. 17 cents. I'm like, I can't even just like walk into the bank. You know how much it costs for me to deposit 17 cents, right? Like this is crazy. But you know, be a good steward and accountant of the funds. And if there are overages or underages, you know, contact us, right? We're a partner. Sometimes things ended up being more expensive. Maybe there's some additional funding at the funder that could go, oh, well, we really want you to be successful. Here's an extra $1,000. Sometimes you're like, oh, we have an extra $1,000. And you go, do you have any other programs? Could you serve one more kid? What does that look like? Use that for your organization, but get permission, right? Don't hear that as just do whatever you want. It's get permission from the funder. But like I said, we generally don't want it back. So we'll usually partner with you to find a way to use it. And again, just acknowledge your funders, acknowledge your donors, recognize them when you can. Also, you know what we don't need? Just a little note as we wrap up here. We don't need like your cute bucket trinket that you give to your big donors, whatever it is, you know. Sometimes when somebody will give us art, I will put art up on our walls, but like, you know, like the kids painted it, I'm like, oh, that's cute. Like I want, you know, that's fine. But like, we don't need all the things, right? Our offices would be full of the things that we funded. And so, you know, we really are trying to be a partner in this. And so we don't need the things for it. And so with that, we have come to the end of the road. And so we have about 2 or 3 minutes here. And I just wanted to kind of set you up for the next time. So we were trying to do 2 lecture-y sections, which is why you've heard me talk a lot. And the next section, you're going to hear me talk a lot less. We have some 2 grant writers, and we'll have a funder sitting on a panel. And I'm going to kind of facilitate a discussion with them and really open it up for you all to ask questions to practitioners, both people that are writing grants and to funders, because I'll be there to help answer questions if need be. But it's really a day designed for you all to like dig in. So in December, it's going to be cold, and it's hopefully going to, maybe it'll be snowy. Like, have had your cup of coffee or your tea or your Diet Coke. Like, be ready, because you're not just going to hear me lecture. We want you to participate. Like, do your hair, get your makeup done, whatever you need to do to look in that camera, because we want you there to participate.
Absolutely, Eric. And the panel is going to be people from our community. So we'll have some grant writers from Noble County and a funder from Noble County. So ask get your questions around, and, invite a board member with you or another staff member with you, because it's going to be a really good session for you to ask your grant writing questions to these individuals and get some answers about how you can better your grant application or make it pop, to that funder. So it's just a great opportunity. And that session will be December 9th. We'll start at 9. It still will be an hour, 9 to 10 Eastern time. And so we are looking forward to seeing you. So I'm going to stop